real stories of werewolves, of Dogman history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Dogman versus the bat-winged werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I was never supposed to see it. I had been hiking alone in the Pennsylvania woods, deep enough that the world felt empty, like the trees had swallowed civilization whole. But now, crouched behind the fallen log, lungs burning from holding my breath, I knew I had gone too far. Just ahead, bathed in pale moonlight, two impossible creatures were locked in a savage battle. The first, tall, gaunt, winged, was like something ripped from a nightmare. It stood nearly my height even while hunched, its leathery wings half folded against its gray sinewy body. Its head was like that of a fox, but stretched somehow, its eyes too large and reflective. When it moved, its claws clicked against the rocks, and with every motion of its wings, a strange dry rustling filled the air. The other was something I recognized only from whispered stories, something I had never believed was real until that moment. A wolf that walked upright like a man, broad-shouldered and thick with muscle. Its fur was dark, blending into the trees behind it, but its eyes burned with a feral intelligence. It let out a deep, rolling snarl, the kind that settles into your bones and tells you to run before you become prey. Neither creature had noticed me. The bat thing struck first, its wings snapping open as it lunged with its hooked talons, aiming for the wolf beast's throat. The dogman dodged, moving with unnatural speed, barely missing the slicing claws. It retaliated instantly, swiping upward, but the bat creature was already flapping, lifting itself just out of reach. I could see the strategy. The winged thing wanted to stay above, to keep swooping down with those knife-like talons, cutting and retreating before the dogman could land a real hit. And for a moment, it looked like it might work. The bat thing swooped again, this time raking a claw across the dogman's side. The beast let out a sharp, snarling yelp, stumbling back. Its ears were flattened, and something in its stance shifted. It wasn't just fighting anymore. Now, it was angry. The next time the bat creature dove, the dogman didn't dodge. Instead, it crouched low, muscles tensing. Then it leapt. It shouldn't have been possible. The dogman shot upward with terrifying force, meeting the bat thing mid-air. The impact sent them both crashing down in a tangle of wings, fur, and claws. The sound was sickening, a mess of snapping and tearing. I should have run then. I should have, but I couldn't move. At that point, I was in such a state of shock that I could only watch. Let me rewind a bit. That morning, it sort of started off like any other morning. I was 23, full of confidence, and had no business being as reckless as I was. Back then, I spent most of my free time hiking alone, pushing deeper into the forest than I should have. I told myself it was about the challenge, testing my endurance, my survival skills. But in truth, I think I just liked being alone. The quiet of the woods felt like an escape, a place where the modern world didn't matter. I picked this section of Pennsylvania wilderness because it was isolated. No marked trails, no campgrounds, just miles of dense trees and rolling hills. The kind of place where, if you weren't careful, you could disappear. The hike had been uneventful at first. The sun filtered through the canopy, dappling the ground with shifting patterns of light. Birds chattered in the distance, unseen but ever present. Now and then I caught the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Squirrels, maybe a fox here and there. By late afternoon, I had reached a high ridge overlooking a deep valley. It was beautiful, untouched, the kind of place that made you feel like you'd step back in time. I decided that was as good a spot as any to make camp. But that's when things started to feel different. I didn't actually notice it at first. The change was gradual, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The usual sounds of the woods, the insects, the birds, the distant calls of animals, they all began to fade. By the time I finished setting up my small fire, the silence was pretty absolute. At first I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a predator had wandered close. A bear, a coyote. But deep down I knew better. I'd camped alone plenty of times. I'd heard the forest go quiet before, but never this quiet. I ate my dinner in that eerie stillness, my ears straining for any sign of life. And then I heard it. The sound from somewhere in the distance. Not a howl, not a growl. Something else. Something dry and unnatural, like sails cackling on the wind. Wings, but big wings. I turned toward the noise, heart pounding. The fire crackled beside me, suddenly too small and too dim. Then came the second sound, low and deep, a rolling growl that sent a shiver straight through me. Something was out there. Two somethings were out there, and they were getting closer. I should have stayed put, or I should have packed up my gear and left. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and I stepped into the trees, stupidly moving toward the sounds. It was curiosity, but yeah, it was also stupidity. And that is how I found them. That is how I ended up watching two nightmares collide under the Pennsylvania moon. I moved carefully through the trees, my flashlight off, following the sounds. The strange flapping came first, slow, deliberate, like something big shifting above the treetops. Then that growl again, deep and resonant, closer this time. A feeling settled in my chest, something instinctual, telling me to turn back. I ignored it. Pushing forward, I reached the edge of a clearing and crouched behind a fallen log. That's when I saw them. The winged creature stood near the tree line, its bat-like form hunched, its fox-like head twitching as if sniffing the air. Its wings half folded, rustled as it took a slow step forward. And then, movement in the darkness. From the opposite side of the clearing, the second creature emerged, taller, broader, covered in thick fur. A canine head, a long snout curling into a snarl. It moved with unnatural grace, shifting from 4 legs to 2 in an instant. They circled each other. The bat thing struck first, leaping into the air and diving with hooked talons outstretched. The dogman dodged, barely missing the attack. The bat thing wheeled around, wings beating the air, preparing for another pass. This time it raked its claws across the dogman's side. The beast flinched but didn't retreat. Instead, it crouched low, muscles coiling, then sprang straight up. I barely had time to process what I was seeing before the two collided in midair. They hit the ground hard, a mess of limbs, claws, and snapping jaws. The bat thing screeched, struggling to take flight again. But the dogman was faster. It slammed the creature down, massive claws tearing into its leathery wings. The bat thing fought back, its talons lashing out, carving deep into the dogman's arm. The wolf beast barely reacted, though. Snarling, it lunged, its jaws closing around the bat thing's throat. The winged creature spasmed. Its claws scrabbled at the dogman's fur, weaker now, desperate. The dogman didn't let it go. It shook its head. The fight was over. But the dogman wasn't done. The dogman was too focused on what it was doing to notice me. I didn't wait for that to change. Moving as slowly as I could, I backed away, careful not to snap a branch or rustle the leaves beneath me. My legs ached to run, but I knew better. If that thing turned and saw me, I wouldn't stand a chance. As soon as I was far enough, though, I did turn and bolt. Branches whipped against my face, underbrush snagged at my clothes. But I didn't stop. I ran blindly, lungs burning, legs screaming, my only thought, get away. Somewhere behind me, the Dogman let out a deep guttural howl. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing near a stream, miles from where I started. I lay there gasping, listening. Nothing. The night was silent again, but it wasn't the same. For me, it would never be the same. I never went back there. For years, I tried to tell myself it hadn't happened, that maybe I had imagined it, that the dark and the exhaustion had twisted my mind. But I knew better. What I saw that night was real. I never told anyone. Who would believe me? A man-sized bat creature fighting a walking wolf? They'd laugh and call me crazy. So I kept it to myself, burying the memory deep, pretending it didn't change me. But it did. I stopped hiking alone. I stopped going too deep into the woods. Even now, decades later, I feel uneasy in forests. That silence, the kind where the whole world seems to be holding its breath, it still makes my skin crawl. On some nights, when the wind is just right, I swear I hear it again. The rustling of wings, big wings, the low, rumbling growl. And I wonder, was that the only battle between these two creatures? Or are there others still happening out there in the dark places we like to pretend don't exist?
Comfort t-shirt for 2025. Scary skull logo is back alive. You won't find this sucker in any store except for an online store with scary merch galore. No matter how big or small you are, we've got a scary story skull t-shirt in your size, modeled here by actual werewolves, but made to fit humans as well. Link is in the description.
The Peripheral Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. The night was still. No wind, no distant hum of traffic, just the quiet weight of the world settling in around me. I stepped out onto the back deck of my house, coffee in hand, the warmth of the mug bleeding into my fingers. The woods stretched out beyond my backyard, dark and motionless, a solid wall of black against the faint glow of the moon. I exhaled, watching the steam coil in the cold air. The house behind me was warm and lit, my wife inside, watching something on TV. I should have been in there with her, but I needed this. The silence, the space. Then, suddenly, movement. I didn't see it directly at first, just a flicker at the edge of my vision. Something dark slicing across the yard near the tree line. My chest tightened. I turned my head and nothing was there, just stillness. I swallowed, shaking it off. A trick of the eye. A shadow cast by the branches. I took another sip of coffee. The warmth did nothing to settle the unease curling in my stomach. And then, it happened again. Not a shadow, not a trick. Something was really there. A shape. A tall figure moving fast on two legs. Too fast. Cutting through the yard toward the trees. Long-limbed, hunched, unnatural. It was there, then it wasn't, swallowed by the black. The air turned electric around me. I set my cup down too hard on the railing, slashing coffee over my fingers, and I didn't even feel it. Maybe I should have called out. Maybe I should have run inside. Maybe I should have told my wife, but what would I even tell her? Instead, I stood there hard hammering, staring into those trees, seeing nothing. The yard was still again. The world was silent. Yet I knew I wasn't alone out there. I didn't mention this to my wife that night. I barely slept, but by morning the whole thing felt ridiculous. The brain does strange things in the dark. Shadows stretch longer than they should. Branches sway just right to trick the eye. I told myself that's all it was. and I wanted to believe myself. But then it happened again and again. Always the same, something moving just out of sight, something watching, a shape shifting in the dark just before I could fully focus on it. It never happened when my wife was outside with me. Never when we were together, only when I was alone. I stopped going out at night. At first I told myself it was just to avoid the cold. Then I started making excuses not to take the trash out after dark. Not to step outside for air. Not to glance outside the windows even when I passed them. But the thing about avoidance is, it doesn't really help. If anything, it makes things worse. Because even inside, I started to feel like I was being watched. I'd be washing dishes, the kitchen window looking out into the yard, and something would shift in those trees. Not wind, not an animal, something upright. I'd snap my head up and then nothing. I'd hear a soft rustling in the dead grass when I was looking up at night, and it was a sound that always stopped the second I turned toward it. I started waking up at odd hours, feeling like I had just missed something, like there had been a presence just outside, just beyond the curtains. One night my wife caught me standing in the dark by the back door, staring out. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice groggy with sleep. I hesitated, but yeah, I said finally. I thought I heard something. She came closer and peered outside. It was probably a raccoon, or that stray dog that's been wandering around. I nodded like I believed her. I did want to believe her, but I knew better. I could feel it. And it wasn't a stray dog. I started paying attention. At first I thought the sightings were random, just odd fleeting moments of paranoia. But as the days passed, I realized there was a pattern. The figure only appeared when I was alone, never when my wife was with me, never when we had company. It also wasn't random in placement. There were specific spots in the yard where I saw it. The tree line, the garden shed, and the fence by the old oak. Every time it moved between those points, disappearing the second I focused on it. It was watching, and it had its territory. I started testing my theory. I'd step outside alone at night, forcing myself to stand on the deck, coffee in hand, eyes locked on the tree line. I'd wait. 5 minutes, 10. Sometimes nothing happened. Other times, I'd see movement. A flicker of something tall, something lean, something wrong. But only when I wasn't looking directly at it. It was playing with me. Or maybe worse, it knew I was watching just as much as I knew it was. I started keeping a notebook. I wrote down every time I saw it, every time I felt something off. December 3rd, 11:40 p.m., dark shape near the trees, too fast for a person, gone before I could focus. December 6th, 9:15 p.m. I thought I saw something move near the shed, maybe a trick of the light. December 8th, 12:02 a.m. Woke up to the feeling of being watched. Looked outside, nothing there. Couldn't get back to sleep. December 10th, 10:30 p.m. I swear I saw eyes. Just for a second. Reflected light? Maybe. I tried to tell myself I was imagining these things, that I was feeding my own paranoia. But that was before the sounds started. It began with breathing. Not loud. Not exaggerated, just soft and close. The first time I heard it, I was locking the sliding glass door before bed. As I reached for the handle, I swear I heard it, just on the other side of the glass. A slow, controlled breath, like someone standing perfectly still, just inches away. I stopped. I listened. It was gone. I told myself it had been my own breath rebounding off the glass. That made sense, right? Except it happened again the next night. And the next. And it wasn't just breathing. I started hearing footsteps. Soft, deliberate steps moving through the dead leaves near the fence line. A soft, measured pace. Not a frantic scurry like a raccoon. Not the quick, darting movement of a deer. Something walking up on two legs. Every time I turned on the porch light, there was nothing there. My wife started noticing a change in me. "You're not sleeping," she said one morning, watching me over her coffee. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine," I lied. "You're not," she said. "You barely go outside anymore." I almost told her then. I almost pulled out my notebook, showed her the entries, explained the pattern. But I knew how it would sound. Instead, I forced a smile. "I've just been feeling off. It's probably stress from work." She narrowed her eyes. "Maybe you should see a doctor." That stuck with me. Not because I thought I needed one, because part of me started to wonder if she was right. What if I was losing it? What if this was some kind of waking dream, some bizarre hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? I had no proof, no footprints, no physical evidence, just glimpses, sounds, feelings, really. Maybe that was worse. If I had proof, I could deal with it. But this made me doubt my own mind. And then one night, the doubt vanished. Because that was the night I heard it right outside the bedroom window. I had been half asleep, drifting in that strange place between dreams and wakefulness, when a sound pulled me back to reality. A low exhale. Long. Controlled. Not mine. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. My wife was asleep beside me. The sound had come from outside. I turned my head slowly, pulse hammering. The curtains were drawn, but I could feel it. A presence. Right there. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then, soft scratching noises. Just for a second. A single deliberate scrape against the glass, not an animal. I stayed frozen until the morning. I told my wife I wasn't feeling very well, and I called out of work the next day. I spent the morning checking every inch of the yard, the fence, the trees, the ground beneath our window. Nothing. No prints. No evidence. It was toying with me. And for the first time I realized something else, too. Whatever it wasn't just watching anymore. It was getting closer. I told myself I wasn't going to look for it anymore. I'd seen enough, felt enough to know it was real. But acknowledging it wasn't helping. Watching it wasn't helping. If anything, it seemed like the more I noticed it, the closer it would come. So I forced myself to stop checking the yard at night. If I heard a noise, I ignored it. If something moved at the edge of my vision, I didn't look. If I felt watched, I told myself I was just being paranoid. That worked for about 3 nights. Then, I saw it again. It was late. I had been upstairs reading, trying to focus on anything that wasn't this thing in the woods. My wife had gone to bed an hour earlier. Eventually, I got up, stretched, and headed downstairs to lock up for the night. As I reached the kitchen, I noticed the trash can by the back door was full. I hesitated. Taking out the trash meant stepping outside. For a split second, I considered leaving it until the morning, but then I imagined my wife waking up to an overflowing bin, and I sighed. I wasn't about to let some weird trick of the eye turn me, as the kind of man who was scared to take out his own garbage. So I grabbed the bag, I slipped on my shoes, and I stepped out onto the back porch. It was colder out there than I expected. The night was completely silent. No wind. No insects, just nothing. That kind of quiet where the whole world feels paused. Like someone is waiting. Or something. I forced myself to move. Down the steps across the yard. Don't look at those trees. Just dump the trash in the bin. Go back inside. It's simple. I lifted the lid, tossed the bag in, and let it slam shut. And then, I heard it. A single step. Right behind me. I turned before I could stop myself, and there it was. Not a shadow. Not a flicker. Not a trick of the eye. A shape. A body. Tall, taller than me, maybe even 7 feet, hunched slightly. Its arms hung low, longer than they should have been. The legs were bent oddly, the way a dog's might be, but it stood upright. and the head. Wolf-like, but not a wolf. The muzzle was a little shorter than a wolf. The ears felt slightly off, almost rounded at the tips. The eyes, dark, too dark, reflecting just enough light to let me know that they were locked on me. We stood there, both completely still. I couldn't move. I couldn't think or breathe. It tilted its head just slightly. Not a random movement, not a twitch. It was studying me. I had the sudden overwhelming sense that this thing was not just some animal. It somehow knew me. And then it took a step forward. That broke whatever trance had locked me in place. I stumbled back, nearly falling, barely catching myself on the trash bin. My breath became too fast, too shallow, my body screaming to run but refusing to move. And then just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. Not in a blur, not in a supernatural way, it just turned and walked away quickly. 1 second it was there, and the next second it had vanished into the trees. I stood there, shaking, listening, but nothing. The night remained still, like nothing had ever been there at all. I don't remember going inside. I must have, obviously, because the next thing I knew, I was locking the back door with shaking hands. My wife's voice startled me. "Is everything okay?" I turned and she was standing at the edge of the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I should have told her then. I should have said something at least, but how? I couldn't even process it myself. So instead I forced a weak smile. "Yeah, I just thought I heard something outside." She yawned. "Probably that stray dog again." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, probably." She went back to bed. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding like I was still outside. Because for the first time, I had seen this thing clearly. And that meant it had let me see it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That thing, whatever it was real. I had seen it. It had seen me. And I knew deep down that it wasn't just passing through. It was here for a reason. But I still didn't tell my wife. I couldn't. How could I? "Hey, honey, I saw a 7-foot wolf thing in the yard last night, but don't worry, I'm sure it's harmless." No, I needed proof. Something, anything. So I set up cameras. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I just went to the hardware store, bought a set of motion-activated cameras, and installed them myself. I figured it'd be good to have, I told my wife, just in case. She didn't argue. For 3 nights I checked the footage first thing in the morning, and every morning I saw nothing. Not a single movement. No shadows, no glowing eyes, nothing. But that was impossible, because I was still seeing it. I was still catching glimpses from the window. I was still feeling it watching me. It was still there. It just knew when it was being recorded. That thought made my stomach turn. Because if it knew about cameras, then that meant it wasn't just some wild animal. It was something else. Something aware. The next night I heard it again. It was late, maybe 2 a.m., and I was lying awake staring at the ceiling when I felt it. That familiar, suffocating pressure. Something was outside. I turned my head toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but I knew if I pulled them back I would see it, standing there, watching me. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. And then, the noise. A soft sound, almost delicate. Tap, tap, tap. My stomach clenched. It was tapping on the glass again, like it knew I was awake, like it was trying to get my attention. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Eventually, the tapping stopped. I waited 10 minutes, 20, an hour. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep because I remember waking up, and the sun was rising, the room filled with pale morning light. My wife stirred beside me, mumbling something as she turned over. I sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in my limbs, the exhaustion that ran deeper than my bones. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached for the curtain, I hesitated, then I pulled it back. The glass was clean. No smudges. No handprints. No sign that anything had ever been there. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe. And then I saw them. Were those smudgy footprints? Deep in the frost-covered glass just below the window. That was it. That was my limit. That night, as my wife settled onto the couch with a blanket, I sat beside her, forcing my hands to stay steady. Maybe we should take a trip, I said casually. She looked at me, raising an eyebrow. A trip? Yeah, just for a weekend. Get away for a bit. She studied me for a long moment, then sighed. You really haven't been yourself lately. I swallowed and I said, I know. A beat of silence then. Okay, she said, let's go. And just like that, we had an escape plan. At least I hoped it would be an escape. We planned to leave Saturday morning. Just a weekend away, nothing dramatic, nothing permanent. My wife thought it would be good for me. A break from work, from stress. She didn't know the real reason I was stressed, though. I told myself the same lie I'd been telling for weeks. That maybe it was all in my head. That maybe once we left, I'd see how ridiculous I was being. But the night before we were supposed to go, she saw it first. She had stepped outside to grab a blanket from the porch. I was in the kitchen rinsing a plate when I heard her gasp. Not a startled noise, not a yelp. A sharp, breathless intake of air like someone realizing they've made a terrible mistake. And then silence. I dried my hands and walked toward the back door, heart already hammering. Honey? She didn't respond. I stepped out onto the porch and she was just standing there. Frozen. Staring at the trees. My stomach dropped. I followed her gaze and there it was. The figure. The thing from my nightmares. From my late-night paranoia. Except this time I wasn't the first one to see it. My wife had seen it before I did. That meant I wasn't crazy. That meant it was real. It stood at the edge of the yard just past the tree line. Tall. Too tall. Upright but hunched slightly forward, those long arms hanging down. The dim porch light barely reached it, but I could make out the outline, the rough shape of its head, those weird, watching eyes. It wasn't moving. It wasn't running. It was waiting, like it had been waiting all along. For me? For her? I didn't know, and I didn't want to find out either. I grabbed my wife's arm gently but firmly and said, inside, now. She didn't argue. She didn't even blink. She just turned and followed me in. I locked the door. I pulled the curtains. I tried to breathe. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, she said, "You've seen it before." It wasn't a question. I nodded. She swallowed, staring at the floor, and then softer she asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't have an answer. We didn't sleep that night. We lay in bed both pretending. Neither of us moving, neither of us speaking, just waiting for the night to end. And when the sun finally rose, I turned to her and she said the words I had been too afraid to say before. "We have to move." She didn't hesitate. She said okay just like that. No protests, no attempts to rationalize, because she had seen it, and now she understood. We started looking for a new place the day we got back. Neither of us talked about what we had seen, not directly at least, but there was an understanding between us now, a quiet urgency. We packed in the evenings, moving through the house like ghosts. I tried not to look outside. I tried not to wonder if it was still watching, if it knew, if it cared. But the night before we left for good, as I carried the last box out to the truck, I couldn't help myself. I turned, just once, and there it was, standing at the tree line, still, silent, watching, not stopping me, not chasing, just watching, like it had always been. like it would always be. I didn't look away, not this time. Instead, I nodded at the creature. A strange, quiet understanding passed between us. And then I got in the truck, shut the door, and my wife and I drove away to our new life.
If I wear a spinny hat, will I look all hunky? Will I look like that handsome chap from that TV show, The Monkees? Everybody wants a woolen cat. The scariest stories Beanie hat. Everybody knows it's a natural fact. The scariest stories Beanie hat. Link is in this video's description if all goes according to plan. Available in black, which is like every color all at once, man.
Son of Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I swear to you, I am not crazy, and I know what I saw. I just don't know why I saw it. The first time it happened, I was locking up my shed out back. It was one of those crisp autumn evenings where the air smells like leaves and the ground feels damp under your boots. I was halfway to the house when I noticed something standing just past the tree line. At first I thought it was a raccoon. It was pretty small, maybe knee-high, but it was standing on its back legs and was watching me. I stopped walking. It didn't move. It was too dark to see details, but something about its shape was off. It wasn't hunched over like a raccoon or balancing on its back legs like a squirrel. It was standing, sort of like a person, perfectly balanced, arms at its sides. I took a step closer and the thing darted behind a tree. Too fast. I don't mean it scrambled or hopped. I mean it moved in one smooth motion, like it had been ready to run. I stood there for a second listening. The woods were quiet. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt... how do I put this? I felt noticed. Like that little thing was still there somewhere, peeking out at me. I gave a nervous chuckle and walked inside, locking the door behind me. That probably should have been the end of it. I probably should have just brushed it off as a weird wildlife encounter. But then the next night, I saw it again. This time I was ready for it. After that first sighting, I'd spent the whole next day thinking about that little thing. I told myself it was probably just a weirdly shaped fox or some freaky trick of the light. But when I went out after dark to take the trash to the curb, I had this weird feeling, like a weight on my chest, telling me to check the tree line. And there it was. Same spot, same height, same posture. It was watching me. I could see the faint outline of its head tilting slightly, like it was curious too. The moment I took a step forward, it zipped away behind the trees. Now, most people would take this as a warning, a small, unknown thing lurking around at night. Probably a good reason to stay inside. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. It didn't feel threatening. It wasn't snarling or charging me. If anything, it seemed like it wanted to come closer but just didn't trust me yet. So the next night, I brought an offering. I stood out on my back porch with a piece of beef jerky in my hand, just watching the tree line. I wasn't even sure if it was there, but I had this gut feeling that it was. So I knelt down, tore the jerky in half, and tossed the piece into the grass about 10 feet away. And then I waited. I stood there for what felt like forever, feeling like an absolute idiot. But just as I was about to turn around and go back inside, I saw movement. It crept out of the shadows, its small, upright body barely visible in the dim light. It paused, its head flicking toward me and then back toward the jerky. Quick as a flash, it darted forward, snatched the piece, and vanished back into the woods. That was all I needed. That one little act convinced me that whatever this thing was, it was smart. It understood what I was doing. so I kept doing it. Night after night I left out more jerky. Sometimes I tossed it closer to the house. Sometimes I just left it on the porch railing and watched him from inside. Every time the thing would show up, grab the food and disappear. But each time it hesitated less. After about a week, it started taking the food while I was still outside. It would wait until I tossed it, then scurry forward just a few feet from me, grab it and retreat. It was always so fast, so smooth in its movements, like a little shadow gliding across the ground. And then, one night, it didn't run away immediately. I just tossed a piece of jerky, and instead of grabbing it and bolting, it stayed put for a second, just standing there, looking at me. That was the first time I got a really good look at it. It was not a raccoon. It wasn't a fox either. It wasn't really like any animal I'd ever seen before. Its body was covered in short, dense fur, a mix of gray and tan. It had a round little face, almost cute, but with a long muzzle, like a tiny dog. Its front limbs ended in what weren't quite paws, but weren't hands either. Something in between, with little fingers tipped in curved claws. And its eyes. They were too big for its face, dark and shiny, reflecting the porch light. It almost looked like a tiny, upright dog. But dogs don't walk on their hind legs. Dogs don't move like this thing did. Dogs just don't act like this thing did. I tried not to startle it, and I said, "Hey, buddy," quietly. It flinched at the sound of my voice, but it didn't run. I knelt down slowly, keeping my hands visible, and placed another piece of jerky on the ground right in front of me. Then I sat back and waited. It hesitated, its little claws flexing at its sides. Then, step by step, it crept forward, and for the first time, it ate the food without running away. That first night it ate without running, I barely breathed. I was maybe 6 feet away, close enough that I could hear it chewing. Its little hands or paws held the jerky as it gnawed at it, those big shiny eyes flicking at me every few seconds, like it was waiting for me to make a wrong move. I didn't, though. I just sat there letting it happen. After that, things changed kind of fast. The next night when I stepped outside with the jerky, it was already waiting. Not hiding in the trees, not darting back and forth, it was there at the edge of the yard, sitting on its haunches like some kind of weird little person. That time I didn't even have to toss the food. I held it out in my palm, and after a few seconds of hesitation, it walked forward on those hind legs, reached out with its tiny clawed fingers, and just took it. I won't lie, I almost pulled back. Feeling it touch me even for that split second sent a weird shiver up my arm. Its fingers were cool and rough, almost leathery. It wasn't a dog, it wasn't a raccoon. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. It now trusted me, so I started to trust it, too. You know, I never intended to bring it inside. That part just sort of happened. It was a cold, drizzly night, and I had been standing on the porch longer than usual, waiting to see if it would show up. I was just about to give up when I heard the familiar rustling near the trees. Sure enough, there it was. But it wasn't moving like usual. It was hunched over, its little arms wrapped around itself, shivering. For the first time I wondered if it was just as vulnerable as any other animal out there. Maybe more. It wasn't built for the cold. It barely had a tail, and its fur looked short and thin. I'm not sure what came over me, but I stepped back, opened the door, and gestured. "You want to come in, buddy?" I didn't expect it to understand, but it did. It did hesitate, looking past me into the house, but then slowly, carefully, it stepped forward. It climbed the porch steps, walking across the threshold, and for the first time, it was inside my house. I eased the door shut behind it, suddenly hyper-aware of how small and strange it looked under my kitchen lights. It sniffed the air, blinking up at me. I crouched down. "You good?" It gave a little soft chuffing noise and took another step forward. I led it to the living room, figuring it would be more comfortable on the rug than the cold tile. It followed, pausing every few steps to take in its surroundings. And then, just like that, it started to play. I hadn't even realized it could play, but the second I rolled a bottle cap across the floor, it was after it, darting on all fours, grabbing it in its little hands and rolling onto its back. It was so, I don't know, normal? For the first time I let myself think that maybe, just maybe, I'd made a real friend out of this thing. I had no idea how wrong I was. The night when this next part happened felt different. There was something in the air, an uneasy stillness outside, but I ignored it, too caught up in my strange new friendship. The little one, by now I was calling it Buddy in my head, was curled up on the rug, gnawing on an old tennis ball I dug out of the closet. I was on the couch half watching a late-night movie, half watching Buddy play. But then the little creature froze. One moment it was rolling around, paws batting at the ball, and the next, it was completely still. Its ears perked up, head turned sharply toward the big picture window that looked out over the backyard and into the woods beyond. I followed its gaze, squinting against the reflection of the TV on the glass. At first I didn't see anything, just the dark outline of trees swaying gently in the night breeze. But then, a shape emerged. It was huge, taller than any man I had ever seen, at least 7 feet, maybe more. And like Buddy, it was standing on its hind legs. But this thing was no little curiosity. This was pure power, thick muscles on a very tall frame. My breath caught in my throat. It was a furry creature and it leaned closer to the glass. In the dim light I could just make out its face. It looked like Buddy. Same canine features, same upright stance, but its eyes glowed with a fierce, intelligent rage. A mother's rage. I realized then what I had done. Buddy wasn't some stray or an abandoned creature. It had a family, a protector. And she was furious. Buddy let out a soft whining sound and scurried behind the couch, peeking out nervously. The mother's gaze followed it, then snapped back to me. Her lips curled, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth, and a deep, rumbling growl vibrated through the glass. I stood, heart pounding. My mind raced through my options, but I felt trapped under the intense stare. I took a step back, trying to show I meant no harm, but the movement seemed to provoke her. Without warning, she lunged forward. Her massive body slammed into the window, and the glass exploded inward. Shards flew everywhere, and I threw my arms up to shield my face, stumbling backward. Buddy yelped and darted deeper into the house, but the mother was focused entirely on me. Her growl deepened, echoing through the room as she stepped through the shattered frame, pieces of glass crunching under her weight. She was even more terrifying up close, towering over me, her head nearly brushing the ceiling. Her fur was thick and wild, patches missing, scars crisscrossing her chest and arms. Her eyes, though, her eyes burned with a terrifying intelligence. I took another step back, heart hammering against my ribs. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I could barely even breathe. "Easy," I whispered, though my voice trembled. "I'm not going to hurt him, I promise." She snarled, lowering herself as if to pounce. I knew then that words were not going to help me. I turned and bolted toward the stairs. The floor shook behind me as she charged after. The sound of her massive feet hitting the floor was like thunder, each step shaking the house as she moved. My ears rang from the window shattering, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. I hit the stairs at full speed, taking them 2 at a time, knowing she was right behind me. The sound she made, half snarl, half roar, ripped through my chest like it had weight to it, like it was something I felt as much as I heard. I didn't dare look back. I knew if I did, I'd freeze up, and if I froze, I was dead. Something heavy slammed into the stairs behind me, shaking the railing as I rounded the landing. She's fast. She's too fast. My foot slipped on the last step and I nearly fell forward onto the hallway floor. I caught myself against the wall, barely staying upright. Then I threw myself into a full sprint toward the bathroom at the end of the hall. Behind me, the mother Dogman let out another guttural, vibrating growl. Closer this time. She was gaining. I lunged for the bathroom door, yanked it open, and barely got inside before slamming it shut. My shaking hands fumbled for the locks. The first slid into place easily, but the second stuck for a terrifying half-second before finally clicking shut. Then boom! The whole door shuddered as she crashed against it. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The door creaked and groaned under the force of her assault. Her claws raked down the wood, deep scratches appearing on my side instantly. I pressed my back against the sink, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles ached. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but what? My phone! I dug into my pocket, nearly dropping it as I scrambled to unlock the screen. My fingers felt numb, unresponsive. The crashing against the door didn't stop. Boom! 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 Splinters flew in all directions. The top hinge started groaning under the pressure. I managed to pull up the keypad and dialed 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? I almost couldn't find my voice. There's something in my house. Sir, what do you mean something? Another impact sent a deep crack splintering through the door frame. The wood was starting to bend inward. I don't know, I gasped. It's an animal, I think, but it's huge. It broke in, it's trying to... Boom! A section of the door buckled. A massive clawed hand shoved through the crack, feeling blindly for the lock. I choked on my own breath and scrambled backward, nearly tripping over the toilet. Stay on the line, sir. Officers are en route. The clawed fingers twitched, feeling along the edge of the door. I watched in horror as they found the top lock, the only thing keeping her out. If she figured out how to turn it, I was done. I had seconds, maybe less. I braced my back against the wall, my eyes darting around for anything I could use as a weapon. The plunger? No. A can of shaving cream? Worthless. My gaze landed on the heavy ceramic toilet lid. Another growl rumbled through the crack in the door. She knew I was cornered. I swallowed hard, unfastening and gripping the toilet lid with both hands, my muscles tensing. If she came through that door, I'd have one shot, one chance to do something. And then I heard the sirens, distant at first but getting closer. The mother Dogman stopped. The pounding on the door ceased, instantly replaced by a tense, heavy silence. The only sound left was my own ragged breathing and the wailing of the approaching police cars. And then I heard it. Heavy footsteps. Retreating. She was leaving. I didn't move or breathe, I just listened. The footsteps were heavy but deliberate, moving away from the bathroom door, down the hall, back down the stairs. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't running. But she was retreating. The sirens grew louder, red and blue lights flickering through the windows. I heard the back door creak open. Not break or slam, but open. She did know how to use doors. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up at the thought of that, but I pushed it aside. I forced myself to move, my muscles stiff and aching. I cracked the bathroom door just enough to peek out. The hallway was empty. I took slow, careful steps, socks silent on the wooden floor, as I inched my way toward the stairs. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. If she was still down there, waiting in the shadows... Police! If anyone's inside, make yourself known. I ran to the stairs and saw two officers stepping into the house, weapons drawn. The second I saw them, I let out a choked breath and practically stumbled down those stairs. I'm here, don't shoot! The cop swung toward me, eyes wide. One of them lowered his gun immediately, stepping forward with a concerned expression. Sir, are you injured? I shook my head fast. No, but it was here. It was just here. It went out the back. I pointed wildly toward the rear exit. One officer moved toward the back door while the other kept his eyes on me. What was here? I hesitated. What was I supposed to say? That a 7-foot-tall wolf woman just tore through my house looking for her weird little humanoid puppy? They wouldn't believe me. Nobody would. But I didn't have time to think of a better answer. The officer by the back door let out a low whistle. "You're not kidding about something being here," he muttered. I turned to look. The door was open just like I'd heard. The frame was splintered where her claws had dug into it as she pulled it open. But more than that, outside, in the mud just beyond the threshold, were tracks. Massive, clawed dog tracks. The officer with the flashlight crouched down to inspect them, his face unreadable. I've seen bear prints before. Buddy, these ain't bear prints. A small surge of relief hit me. They see it. They see the proof. But it didn't last long. The first officer shook his head. "Nah, it's probably a hoax. Kids messing around." Or, he gave me a look. The kind that told me he was already trying to fit this into a logical box. Maybe it was, some kind of a deformed animal. I wanted to argue, but I also didn't, so I just exhaled, shoulders slumping. Yeah, maybe it was deformed. Buddy. The thought hit me all at once. I twisted around, scanning the room. Where was Buddy? The little one was gone. Had he run after his mother, or had she taken him? Either way, I knew I probably wasn't going to be seeing him again. The police did their usual routine, took my statement, took some photos. One of them actually measured the prints outside, muttering something about how they were too long to be a bear, but too deep to be faked. But in the end, the official conclusion? Could have been a bear. That's what they wrote in the report. That's what I'd have to live with. A bear. A big, weird, door-opening, window-smashing bear that just so happened to walk upright like a man. They left after about an hour, told me to board up the window, said to call if I saw anything else. I nodded along, knowing that I probably wouldn't. The mother had made her point, and I understood her message loud and clear. Stay away. She had let me live. That was a warning, not mercy. I haven't seen Buddy again since that night. I haven't felt anything weird watching you from the tree line either. But every so often, late in the night, I hear something out in the woods. A rustling. A soft, low, chuffing noise. Almost like a breath. I never check to see what it is, though. I don't like to go outside after dark anymore.
She donated to us so this channel could live. I'm talking about Sabrina Midkiff. Please join me in thanking channel member Sabrina Midkiff for making this episode possible. She donated a big $25 to us using our thanks button located under each of our videos. We'll get that money at the end of next month. You can also donate to us using our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page, where we get the money the same day. That link is in our description. As a channel member, the great and wonderful Sabrina Midkiff gets to see our weekly secret uncensored episodes, including our newest one, The Comic Book Werewolf. For more information about how you can help this channel stay online, here's our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LSCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
more scary stories.